I know that we weren't close. It was a small school. We knew each other. Elvis was always different.
At 81, Elvis Presley's former bodyguard has finally broken his long silence, and what he reveals changes everything we thought we knew about the king of rock and roll. For decades, he stood by Elvis's side, guarding not just his body, but his secrets, his struggles, and his pain behind the fame. Now, with time as his only witness, he opens up about the truth. The man behind the music, the loneliness behind the smile, and the moments that still haunt him. Join us, because what he says about Elvis's final days will leave the world speechless. The words he revealed, Red West understood the weight of silence. For years, he carried the truth of what it meant to stand beside Elvis Presley, a man loved by millions but truly known by few. At 81, Red no longer felt the need to hold back. The years had stripped away his fear of judgment, leaving only honesty and memory. He had lived through the whirlwind, the long nights, the endless tours, and the fragile moments that fame could never hide. To the world, Elvis was untouchable, a shining figure of rhythm and charm. But to Red, he was human, complicated, lonely, and searching for peace he could never quite find. Working for Elvis was not a job, it was a way of life. There were no rules, no schedules, and no limits. When Elvis decided to ride his motorcycle through the desert at midnight, Red was there. When he wanted to play racquetball until sunrise, Red was still there. His loyalty became a quiet shadow, following the king wherever he went. Red remembered the laughter that would fill the mansion, sudden, loud, and contagious. Elvis could be playful like a child, teasing his friends, singing just for fun. Yet just as quickly, that light would fade. There were moments when Elvis would fall silent, staring into nothing, lost in thoughts no one could enter. Red had learned never to ask. He simply stayed close, a silent guard for a man who carried more sorrow than anyone could guess. There were nights when anger took over, bursts of emotion that came without warning. Red had seen Elvis throw things across the room, break down in tears, or retreat into solitude. Those were the moments when fame meant nothing, when the king became just a man drowning in the pressures of his own legend. Red was among the few who saw this side of him, the one hidden behind the stage lights and applause. Yet even in his chaos, Elvis had a heart that never stopped giving. Red recalled countless times when Elvis's generosity left everyone speechless. If someone's car broke down, a brand new one would appear by morning. If a friend admired his watch, Elvis would slip it off his wrist and hand it over without hesitation. His kindness was effortless, but it came at a cost. Red often felt that Elvis was giving away pieces of himself, small fragments of love and energy he could never recover. As the years passed, Red watched the man he admired fade beneath the weight of fame and loneliness. The late nights grew darker, the laughter less frequent. Red did his best to protect him, not just from fans or reporters, but from the demons that haunted him within. He saw the exhaustion in Elvis's eyes, the quiet cry for help no one wanted to hear. But that wasn't all he said. The weight of the crown. Working beside Elvis Presley demanded far more than strength or loyalty. It required silence, precision, and a steady heart. Red West knew that serving the world's biggest star meant living every day on the edge. Behind the flashing lights and cheering crowds, there was another world, one filled with tension, secrecy, and endless responsibility. Every letter, every fan, every sudden knock on the door could carry danger. Red had seen it all. The threats hidden in fan mail, the women who forced their way on stage, and the strangers who tried to slip into hotel rooms pretending to be staff. He learned to move quickly, to check every room, every car, every exit. Protecting Elvis was not just a job. It was a constant battle against the unseen. But beyond all that chaos, Red found something unexpected: quietness. Elvis, the man who set stages on fire, could be astonishingly reserved once the crowd was gone. There were days when he barely spoke, lost in thought. Then suddenly, he would open up, asking about Red's family or wondering aloud about life, death, and what came after fame. His mind, Red noticed, never stopped turning. Beneath the fame and fortune lived a man who doubted himself, who questioned if he was still good enough. After every performance, even after fans screamed his name with devotion, Elvis would turn to those closest to him and ask if he did all right. For a man who had conquered the world, he still carried a heart uncertain of its own worth. Red admired him for that, for his honesty, for the way he never let power consume him. With everything he had, fame, money, and adoration, Elvis could have become cold or cruel, but he remained human, imperfect, and kind. Still, Red saw how fame could twist the world around him. Elvis was often surrounded by people who wanted something from him: attention, money, or connection. Red didn't trust many of them. He knew Elvis longed for true friendship, for someone who would understand him beyond the legend, but that search often led him into the wrong hands. Red's protectiveness sometimes caused clashes within their circle, but his loyalty never wavered. It was always Elvis he cared for, not the spotlight that came with him. But to understand the depth of the relationship, we have to view it from the beginning. The boy from Hume's High. Long before the bright lights of Las Vegas and the glittering suits of fame, there was only Memphis, a quiet town where two boys began a friendship that would last more than 20 years. Red West always said he was not just Elvis Presley's bodyguard, but his friend. That bond started long before the world knew Elvis's name, back when both of them were just teenagers trying to find their place in a world that didn't yet understand them. Red first met Elvis in the early 1950s at Hume's High School. Red was a strong, confident athlete, known for his toughness and fierce loyalty. Elvis, on the other hand, was polite, shy, and unlike anyone else. He wore flashy clothes, styled his hair slick and high, and carried his guitar everywhere he went. While others teased him for looking different, Red saw something special: a quiet fire in his eyes, a confidence that refused to fade even when others laughed. One afternoon, when a few boys tried to pick on Elvis, it was Red who stepped in. He didn't say much, but his presence was enough to end the fight before it began. That moment sealed a friendship that would grow deeper than either of them could imagine. They came from the same humble background, both raised on hard work and respect. Neither had much, but they understood each other perfectly. After graduation, life took them down separate paths. Red joined the Marines, while Elvis began chasing music. Yet when Heartbreak Hotel made Elvis a star in 1956, he didn't forget the boy from Hume's High. One of the first calls he made was to Red, inviting him to join his growing circle. Elvis didn't care for the fancy faces around him. He wanted people who knew him before fame, before the world claimed him. From that day on, Red became more than protection. He was a friend, a confidant, and often the voice of truth in Elvis's chaotic life. Together they traveled the country, shared laughter at Graceland, and lived through nights filled with music and conversation. Red saw the real Elvis, the one who laughed until tears came, who played pranks on friends, and who could sit quietly thinking about his mother or his faith. Their friendship had a rhythm all its own. They joked like brothers, sparred in karate, and talked about cars, women, and dreams. Red was one of the few who could be honest with Elvis, even when it hurt. That honesty was what Elvis valued most in the beginning. As the years passed and Elvis's fame grew, so did the group around him, the Memphis Mafia. Yet Red remained one of the originals, one of the few who remembered Elvis before the spotlight. Still, fame has a way of changing even the strongest bonds. Red noticed the laughter fading, the nights growing longer, and the light in Elvis's eyes dimming. Though he stayed close, he could feel the distance widening. Through it all, Red never stopped caring. He remembered the young man from Memphis, the one who strummed his guitar in school halls and dreamed of something bigger. That was the Elvis he loved. In his later years, Red spoke softly of their bond, of the mistakes and memories they shared. He said he had loved Elvis deeply, and in his heart, he knew that love had been returned. Inside the King's Circle. To the outside world, Elvis Presley seemed to live like royalty, a man of wealth, power, and endless admiration. But behind the shining stage lights and the crowds of screaming fans, There existed a small, tightly bound circle of men who shared his world in a way no one else could. They were called the Memphis Mafia. The name sounded daring and mysterious, but for those who lived it, the reality was far from glamorous. It was a life of loyalty, exhaustion, and devotion to a man whose fame never slept. The Memphis Mafia was made up of Elvis's closest friends and family, men like Red West, Sonny West, Joe Esposito, and Jerry Schilling. They weren't hired bodyguards or simple assistants. They were companions who had known Elvis long before the fame took over his life. They followed him everywhere, from movie sets to concerts, from Graceland's gates to hotel rooms across the world. Their job was simple in words, but impossible in practice. Keep Elvis safe, happy, and surrounded by people he trusted. Red West, one of the earliest members, often found himself at the heart of the chaos. Life around Elvis followed no pattern. There were no days off, no fixed hours, and no certainty of rest. When Elvis wanted to watch movies until dawn, everyone stayed awake. If he felt like flying to Denver in the middle of the night just for a peanut butter and banana sandwich, the jet was ready within minutes. When he wanted to sing gospel songs in the living room or spar in karate matches outside, it happened instantly. Everything revolved around Elvis's mood, what he wanted, when he wanted it, and how he wanted it. It wasn't a normal job, it was a lifestyle. Each man in the Memphis Mafia adapted to what they called Elvis time. They slept when he slept, ate when he ate, and traveled when he decided to move. For some it was thrilling, for others it was draining. But for all of them it was a bond, a shared loyalty that went beyond work. Elvis didn't want strangers watching over him. He wanted friends who treated him like the man he was before the fame. There were moments of laughter and pure joy among them. Nights at Graceland often turned into playful scenes filled with music, jokes, and endless games. Elvis loved entertaining even in private, reenacting movie scenes, pulling clever pranks, or hosting impromptu jam sessions that could last till sunrise. Those were the moments when he seemed most alive, surrounded by the people he trusted most. But life inside the circle came with shadows too. The same closeness that made them a family also blurred the lines between friendship and duty. Red often had to step in as the peacekeeper, the one who stood between Elvis and the chaos that fame constantly attracted. Whether it was calming fans, managing arguments, or protecting Elvis from bad influences, Red's loyalty was tested daily. But then the wall was put up. Behind the wall of fame. There was a time when Elvis Presley's world seemed golden. The lights, the fans, the laughter, all of it formed the perfect picture of success. But behind that glow stood something darker, something that only those closest to him could see. Among them was Red West, a loyal friend and bodyguard who had walked beside Elvis through triumph and tragedy. Red remembered how Elvis dreaded being alone. The laughter and noise around him were his shield against silence, and his friends, including Red, became the walls that kept loneliness away. At first, it felt like a brotherhood, a group bound by loyalty and love. But slowly, that bond turned into a barrier. The wall they built no longer protected Elvis from the outside world. It kept him trapped within himself. His fame became both his crown and his cage. The people around him wanted to protect him, yet they also feared upsetting him. It became an unspoken rule: never challenge Elvis. Elvis was kind and generous, but he was also proud and deeply sensitive. A single suggestion could wound him if spoken at the wrong time, and so silence became the safest answer. When Red noticed Elvis's growing dependence on medication and his sudden changes in mood, he tried to speak up, but his concerns often faded into the background. The king's charm and power could fill a room, but so could his sadness. Sometimes Elvis would lock himself away in his room at Graceland, disappearing for days. The mansion was grand, but it often felt like a prison. When he finally emerged, he would smile again, ready to perform as if nothing had happened. The music, the lights, the applause, they became a mask. Behind it, Elvis was tired, weighed down by the cost of being a legend. Red stayed through it all, the endless tours, sleepless nights, and moments of heartbreak. He didn't stay for fame or fortune. He stayed because he cared. He saw the real man behind the legend, the boy from Tupelo, who once dreamed of sharing his voice with the world. To Red, Elvis was still that man, flawed yet full of heart, capable of deep kindness and devotion. But loving someone like Elvis came with pain. Red and the others carried the burden of watching him fade. They wanted to help, yet every attempt risked being seen as betrayal. They were trapped, just like him, inside a world where truth was dangerous and silence was safer. The shadows behind the king. Behind the charm, the fame, and the glittering jumpsuits, Elvis Presley lived a life that few truly understood. To the world, he was the king of rock and roll, adored by millions and celebrated everywhere he went. But to those who stood close enough to see behind the curtain, there was another side, a side filled with loneliness, fear, and an aching battle with himself. In his early years, Elvis was full of energy and passion. He could perform for hours, then spend the rest of the night riding motorcycles with his friends or watching movies until dawn. The laughter never seemed to end. But as time passed, something in him began to change. His longtime friend and bodyguard, Red West, noticed the signs, the slow movements, the sudden anger, the forgetfulness. Elvis was still the king, but his crown had grown heavy. It started quietly. He had trouble sleeping. The pressure of fame, the endless travel, and the demand to always be perfect began to wear him down. Doctors offered him what seemed like harmless help: pills for sleep, pills for energy, pills to ease the pain. At first, they worked. He could rest, perform, and carry on as if nothing was wrong. But soon, the pills became more than just medicine. They became a way to escape. Fame is a world that gives everything yet takes away peace. For Elvis, every stage he stood on came with eyes watching his every move. Every smile he gave was met with expectations he couldn't always meet. Slowly, he began to lean more and more on those little white pills to face each day. He didn't see it as a problem. It was all prescribed, all legal. But Red could see the truth. The Elvis he once knew began to drift away. Sometimes during a conversation, Elvis would suddenly fall asleep. At other times, his words would slur, or his mood would shift in an instant, from laughter to rage, then back to sorrow. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper. He had become trapped inside a world that revolved around keeping him happy, even when happiness felt out of reach. As the years went by, paranoia began to creep in. Elvis started to believe people were watching him, stealing from him, or plotting against him. He would check the locks repeatedly, order sudden security searches, and question even those who loved him most. Red remembered how one moment Elvis would treat them like family, and the next as if they were strangers. It was heartbreaking to watch, yet no one dared to confront him. Despite being surrounded by people, Elvis was deeply lonely. He could no longer walk down the street or visit a diner like an ordinary man. Every attempt to live normally turned into chaos. Fans saw him as larger than life, but inside Graceland, he was a prisoner of his own fame. The curtains were always drawn. The phones were tightly monitored. Only a few people were allowed near him. Days would pass without him stepping outside. He would sit in his room for hours, half awake, the glow of the television flickering across his tired face. The pressure to keep performing never stopped. The world demanded Elvis Presley, the legend, the entertainer, the showman. But the man behind that image was falling apart. His health began to crumble under the weight of endless tours, long nights, and the constant cycle of pills. Yet, he never knew how to say no. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. Not his fans, not his team, not even himself. That desire to please everyone became his downfall. Each yes pushed him deeper into exhaustion. When Red tried to step in, he was often ignored or brushed aside. Others in the circle stayed quiet, afraid to upset him or lose their place in his world. If Elvis wanted more medication, he got it. If he convinced himself he was fine, everyone simply agreed. It was easier than facing the truth. Red watched helplessly as Elvis changed before his eyes. The man who once burned with life now moved like a shadow. His weight fluctuated, his eyes lost their sparkle, and his laughter no longer reached his soul. Some nights, Red would stay outside his door, listening, hoping to hear a sign that Elvis was okay. Sometimes there was a sound, a movement, a word. Other times there was only silence. Fear began to rule Elvis's heart. Fear of death, fear of losing everything, and most of all, fear of being forgotten. That fear made him restless. He would order sudden concerts at midnight, ask for entire rooms to be redecorated overnight, or decide to fly across the country without reason. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was desperation. He was trying to control something, anything, in a world that no longer felt his own. In his later years, Elvis turned toward strange beliefs, studying books on numerology and hidden spiritual codes. He spent hours searching for meaning in words and numbers, convinced they held answers to his pain. He was looking for peace, for something beyond fame and fortune, but he never found it. But while looking for peace, he lost sight of what was in front of him, which was loyalty. The final rift, when loyalty turned to loss. By the summer of 1976, the walls of Graceland felt colder, heavier, and far more distant than they once had. The laughter that once filled its halls had thinned, and so had the bond that tied Elvis Presley to one of his oldest friends, Red West. For nearly 20 years, Red had been more than a friend. He was a brother, a confidant, and a shield. He had walked beside Elvis long before fame crowned him the king. But that summer, everything changed. The news came like a thunderclap. After 2 decades of loyalty, Red West was dismissed from Elvis's inner circle, without warning, without explanation, and not even by Elvis himself. The message was delivered through intermediaries, distant and impersonal. There were no goodbyes, no words of gratitude, just a decision that severed a bond built over years of shared triumphs and heartbreaks. For Red, it wasn't just losing a job. It was like losing family. Red had been there from the very beginning. He had fought for Elvis, guarded him from harm, and stood by his side through every storm. He had seen the young dreamer from Tupelo transform into the most famous man on earth, and he had done everything in his power to keep him grounded. Yet now he stood outside the gates of Graceland, shut out from the life he had helped protect. He wasn't the only one. His cousin Sonny West and another bodyguard, David Hebler, were also dismissed. Officially, the excuse was budget cuts, but everyone inside Graceland knew that wasn't the full story. Truth ran deeper. Red had become too outspoken about what was happening to Elvis. He had voiced his fears about the growing dependence on prescription medications, the erratic behavior, and the people who surrounded Elvis but refused to confront the truth. His honesty, once valued, had turned into a threat. In the fragile world of Elvis's inner circle, silence was safety. To question was to betray. Red couldn't keep quiet anymore, and that may have sealed his fate. Losing Elvis's trust broke him. His entire adult life had revolved around the singer's needs, his security, his moods, his health. Red had postponed his own dreams, his family, and his ambitions just to stay by Elvis's side. To be cut off without even a word from the man he had loved like a brother was more painful than anything else he had endured. But the story did not end there. Heartbroken, confused, and powerless to help, as he watched Elvis's health decline, Red made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He decided to tell the truth. Together with Sonny West and David Hebler, he began working on a book that would expose what was really happening behind Graceland's closed doors. The title was simple, yet explosive. Elvis. What Happened? It was the first time anyone from Elvis's trusted circle had spoken openly about his struggles. The authors insisted it wasn't meant to humiliate him. It was a desperate attempt to save him, a warning cry dressed as a confession. They believed that by revealing how bad things had become, Elvis and those around him would finally face reality. But the world didn't see it that way. When news of the book reached Graceland, chaos erupted. Elvis's camp condemned it instantly. Fans felt betrayed. Hate letters poured in by the thousands. Red West, once admired for his loyalty, was suddenly painted as a traitor, a man who had sold his friends' secrets for profit. The backlash was fierce and unforgiving, and then tragedy struck. Elvis, What Happened, was released on August 1st, 1977. Just 2 weeks later, Elvis Presley was gone. The king of rock and roll passed away on August 16th, leaving the world in shock. The timing of the book's release made the storm even worse. Headlines accused Red and the others of breaking Elvis's heart, of pushing him over the edge. It didn't matter that the book had been written months earlier. It didn't matter that Red had written it out of love and desperation. The damage was done, and Red became the man who had betrayed Elvis just before his death. For Red, the grief was unbearable. He had never wanted to hurt Elvis. He had wanted to reach him. In interviews years later, he explained that they had tried everything else. They had talked, begged, and pleaded with him in his circle, but nothing worked. Writing the book, he said, was the last thing they could do. It was never about revenge. It was about saving a man who was slipping away from himself. The book was raw and painful. It spoke about the substance use, the anger, the paranoia, and the isolation. It revealed the side of Elvis that fans never saw, the one who was lonely, afraid, and lost behind the glamour. But it also showed his goodness. It spoke of his generosity, his deep love for people, his faith, and his constant search for meaning. It was not an attack. It was an unfiltered portrait of a man burdened by his own greatness. Yet, few saw it that way in 1977. Red's name became a target. His reputation suffered. Longtime friends turned their backs on him. The phone stopped ringing. He carried the label of betrayer for years, even though his heart had broken with the same grief as everyone else when Elvis passed away. The saddest part was that the two men never spoke again. Red never got to explain, never got to say goodbye. The man he had protected since their teenage years passed away without reconciliation. For Red, that was the wound that never healed. He had spent much of his life trying to protect Elvis from others, never realizing that he might one day need to protect Elvis from himself. Time, however, has a way of revealing the truth. As the years passed, more stories emerged about Elvis's decline, his addiction, and the pressures he faced. People began to see Elvis, What Happened, in a different light. What once seemed like betrayal started to look more like a cry for help, a tragic attempt to save a friend who had already slipped too far. Historians and fans alike began to understand that Red's motives were never cruel. He had done what few dared to do, tell the truth when everyone else remained silent. In his later years, Red reflected on those times with sadness, but also with honesty. He never claimed to be perfect. He admitted that he had stayed silent for too long before finally speaking up. But one thing he never wavered on was his love for Elvis. He had been there at the beginning, and even after all the pain, he still carried that loyalty until his last breath. To the world, Elvis Presley will always be remembered as a legend, the man who changed music forever. But to Red West, he was something more. A friend, a brother, a soul who needed saving. The story of their fallout is not one of betrayal, but of heartbreak. The kind that comes when love meets silence and truth arrives too late. What do you think about Red West's confession? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.